We have with us tonight an incredible human being who we are fortunate enough to come back to talk about being a veteran himself, what it's like. Mark, could you please introduce our guest for tonight?
Absolutely. Honored to introduce Patrick Troy-Brandt, who was born and raised in Burlington, North Carolina. Patrick grew up acting and teching in community public school theater, only putting his artistry on pause to join the Army after graduating high school in 2004. After an honorable discharge in 2010, Patrick returned to his home and used the GI Bill to attend Guilford College in Greensboro, North Carolina. Outside of school, Patrick reconnected with old theater friends, helping to develop the Fly By Night Theater Company. The FBN gang enjoyed some wonderful years creating new, innovative, and sometimes hilarious work before succumbing to the financial woes of what many local theater companies had. Patrick graduated in 2015 with a BA in theater performance and then moved to Asheville, North Carolina, where he performed professionally with Flat Rock Playhouse, North Carolina Stage, Immediate Theater Project, and Attic Salt Theater Company. But in 2018, he auditioned for and was accepted to the 3-year professional conservatory at Stella Adler Studio of Acting in New York. Patrick completed his training at Stella Adler in August of 2021. He currently lives in Brooklyn with his partner, Nina, and his black cat, Bruce. Welcome back, Patrick.
Welcome back, Patrick.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark. Yeah, it's great to be here. It's a very actor-heavy bio because I believe that's from my website, so that would make sense. So any representation listening out there, pay attention to everywhere that I've worked.
Yeah, and there are lots. Absolutely. Fly By Night Theater. That sounds like an incredible thing. Tell us. I don't think we even spoke about that last time. Tell us about that.
Sure. It's a great place to start. So to recap a little bit, I left to go into the Army right after high school. I enlisted in what they call the delayed entry program at 17. When I was still in high school, I knew I wanted to go in, at that point, and you can sign up technically as a child, as long as you don't actively deploy to war before you're 18, you can, go through basic training and all that. But anyway, so after the Army, I went back to my hometown in 2010, and I had a bunch of friends that went to school for theater. And my plan after the Army was to be a history teacher, actually, and I figured I would keep acting as kind of a hobby, but I didn't really think I'd want to do it, professionally, or think I could. So my friends approached me about starting up a little independent theater company, and we had a great time with that, for a few years before, like it says, just the reality of starting a theater company is it's probably going to tank at some point, but have fun while it lasts. So yeah, we did.
Yeah. That sounds like so much fun. Did you bring a lot of the energy that you had in the service? I mean, because we're going to be definitely focusing on the service.
Yeah. So yeah, I actually, so I want to talk a little bit about this event I just went to this past Monday, in which Adam Driver, the actor, he's a Marine veteran, and he believes very strongly in connecting veterans to the arts community, and active service members to the arts community. And he has a organization called Arts in the Armed Forces that puts on events such as the one that I went to with my wife this past Monday, where it was Adam Driver and a number of other actors, Stephen Boyer, John Turturro, Lucy Taylor, Jonathan Majors, a lot of celebrities going up there and offering monologues and other performed pieces for a theater full of veterans, and it was a free event. And Adam Driver had a little Q&A afterwards, and one of the things he talked about was comparing the type of individual that comes from the military service, transitioning into the theater community, and how that individual brings with them so many aspects that parallel both of those worlds. Just having a work ethic and just having that drive, knowing that you need to show up early if you're showing up on time, and if you're on time, you're late. Um, the extreme situations that service members have to deal with, the very real life or death situations that service members deal with, that then translates into bringing the truth of a imagined life or death situation on stage.
Mm.
Working in a tight knit group of people that maybe, the day before you didn't know them and they were complete strangers, but you all know you have a mission, whether that mission is to, conduct a military operation or to put on a theater performance. You have a common goal and you have a drive, and you bring an aspect of teamwork, as a veteran, that maybe many civilian artists were not necessarily as exposed to. And this is all, again, what Adam Driver was sort of talking about that really resonated with me, and I think he put it in a really nice, succinct way.
And what an interesting connection between that and theater and the service and the teamwork and strangers coming together. And in many ways, that's what happens with us, not only here on the Dr. Joe Show, but with our sponsors, because it is a teamwork, and many of them will be strangers to you until you listen to what they have to offer. So with that in mind, Larry, let's take a commercial break and we'll be right back with the Dr. Joe Show.
And we're back with the Dr. Joe Show with Patrick Troy-Brandt, a veteran of our United States military. And we're talking about his transition into theater from that career.
Yeah, we were talking about some of the parallels when we were off air. So I'm wondering whether you could just extrapolate on that a bit between theater and the service.
Sure. Well, and I think you had, sort of brought it up as kind of contrasting the two, like how does a soldier's mind go from that environment into an actor's mind? And I was kind of saying that I think that there's a perception of what makes the ideal soldier's brain or soldier's mind versus what actually does. And maybe some people think that an ideal soldier is one that just follows orders strictly by the book and doesn't question them, and never thinks outside of that parameter. But really, what an ideal soldier can do is know the mission, but improvise, in order to get what the idea of the mission is when things start to go wrong. Because as anyone knows, it has been in any job anywhere, things always go wrong. Murphy's Law is not just a military thing. So in the same vein, that a soldier needs to be able to improvise, but still needs to have the main idea of the mission objective in mind. It's the same with the actor. You have an actor on stage that has memorized lines and has a beginning of the scene, middle, and an end of the scene. But what the real actor needs to be able to do is receive everything that's happening in that moment and everything that's truthful, that have been different than the night before or the rehearsal, and so an actor's ability to improv while still getting to the end of the scene, it quite directly parallels what the modern soldier is asked to do. Not the soldier 100 years ago who needed to just take a piece of land and hold it, or die trying.
So what is that evolution from that soldier that you just described to the modern soldier? How do you understand that happening?
Well, I understand it from a very amateur, anecdotal, I guess, perspective, I would say. But so I was a paratrooper, right? And one of the big, hallmarks of an airborne unit is the ability to operate when you're all scattered, 6 ways to Sunday all over a drop zone. So what started in the paratroopers was the dissemination of information down to the lowest ranking guy. And this was in World War II, right? So in World War II, typically, you had your lowly privates and they didn't know anything about the operation. The sergeant knew what was going on, the officers knew, but if they were taken out, then these privates didn't really know what to do. So paratroopers started teaching everyone down. Everyone was on the same page. Everyone knew what the big picture was and what the small picture was. So if you had 3 or 4 little privates that they were the only ones on the drop zone that linked up in the middle of the night, they still knew what to do and still knew how to carry on the mission. So my understanding is that type of mentality slowly grew and grew and grew. And, the war that I was faced with, I was much more of a cop, than a soldier. I was boots on the ground in uniform, a representation of authority mixed among a civilian population, trying to decipher who were the good and the bad people.
I don't think this listening audience knows where you were deployed. So can we just talk about that?
I was deployed to Afghanistan for a year in 2005, 2006, and I did 2 years in Iraq non-consecutively. So I was in Afghanistan for a year, back home for a year, in Iraq for a year, back home for a year, in Iraq again for another year, and that's when I was discharged.
And so with that context, I think it adds to what you're saying. So you're in uniform
Right.
in a village or a town, and your job is to do what?
That's a great question. And it's, gosh, I think another big misconception is that people will lump Iraq and Afghanistan into the same conflict. And in a lot of ways, it just really, really wasn't. But what was similar is that as a United States soldier, you're sticking out there like a sore thumb, and there's no real element of surprise, especially in Afghanistan, unless you're, going on helicopters in the middle of the night somewhere. They'll see the cloud of a truck coming from miles away and they know you're coming. So, I thought about that a lot. We're like uniformed police officers, rolling up in a community that's unwelcoming for one reason or another, and just how, there were so many times when we had these key leader engagements, when we'd be sitting down in the huts and the compounds with the local leadership, and there's a certain, I don't want to say arrogance in a disrespectful way, but there was definitely that sort of air of, we were playing a psychological game with them, being the Americans. Like we're just, yeah, just tell us what you need for your village and we'll get it to you, and then you tell us where the bad guys are, right? And
Right.
that would happen again and again, and the amount of times that we would just kind of take that information for face value because we didn't have any other choice, and you need to have results. So if they tell you that the bad guys are over, in this compound or that compound, you get what evidence you can, and but the time comes you kind of have to act on it. I hope that kind of makes sense. It's what I'm talking about, as opposed to a uniformed enemy, where there's, the Germans are on that side, we're over here, they're in gray uniforms, go get them, yeah, it was a lot like, I'm reminded of actually a movie that I consider kind of underrated and a bit of a sleeper, The Siege, starring Denzel Washington, which is a fictitious account of Islamic extremist cell that takes over New York City, I believe, and kind of what happens this was pre 9/11, so we were imagining what would happen if an extremist
Hmm.
cell were to take over New York, and the army is called in to deal with it in martial law. And I believe Bruce Willis's character as the general of the army says, "You just brought in a broadsword to do the work of a scalpel." Um,
Hmm.
and I think that says a lot of the underlying issues in Afghanistan and Iraq. Uh,
Hmm.
but yeah,
Mark, did you want to add something, or so you?
Well, I was wondering if sometimes they had given you bad information in order to get good things for their community. I thought maybe you were going there. Is that something that happened?
it absolutely, and it's and another, I think, important factor that maybe a lot of people who weren't there don't realize is that in Afghanistan, particularly, and Iraq, it's not just extremist, versus American soldier. There are criminal elements there. There are just people that are there to try and profiteer off of, by playing the game. And so, you roll up into a village and you have a corrupt police chief, who to our American eyes, he's the police chief, right? He's the guy in charge. Like, he's the uniform we go and see. All the locals know that this police chief is corrupt. They see the Americans talking with him and meeting with him. So what does that look like to them? All of a sudden, we're working for him. So they stop trusting us automatically, because of that. And then we see their mistrust as being shady, right? And then we're like, well, why are you all of a sudden automatically wary of the Americans? Does that mean you have something to hide from us? So, it's just this he said, she said, convoluted thing that I, I think 9 times out of 10, it just started to spin out of control just in time for a new deployment cycle to happen, right? And for, these, because that's another thing that I've heard my brothers and sisters gripe over constantly, is that it was so impossible for us to have any common relationship with the people on the ground because we were deployed for a year at a time. And excuse me, had a lot of Taco Bell before I came here.
Hmm.
But and then in a year we're out and total strangers come in. I mean, they're Americans, but they don't know these, I mean, every American
What,
is different, just like everyone else is different.
what was? I mean, again, you might not be able to answer, but what was the thinking behind that? That a year in, then a year back home.
I think that it was the powers that be in charge thinking we need to make this look good, and we need to make it look like we're not keeping our soldiers away from their families for years on
Mhm.
end, etc. Um,
Mm.
I mean, I just think that would be such a crazy concept to people who are not actually over there. But I think if you really were to talk to a lot of veterans like myself that had a lot of time, outside the wire, as we would call it, outside of the base, engaged in the locals, I think that a lot of people would say that we needed to have those relationships to really understand. I mean, to understand what these people were going through for another thing, because this this war, this conflict deserved that humanity. I mean, because it's not just uniformed enemy. It, uh, yeah, we were
It,
police without knowing our community.
yeah. It is always about relationships and about trust and value. And of course, that's also what we do here at the Dr. Joe Show. We talk a lot about trust and value, respect. And we also trust and value our sponsors because we have relationships with them, and I want to share them with you now, listeners. So, Larry, let's take a commercial break. We'll be right back with the Dr. Joe Show.
And we're back with the Dr. Joe Show with Patrick Troy-Brandt talking about some amazing stuff. So be sure to stay tuned.
Yeah. Yeah, we're talking about amazing stuff. And, one of the things I wanted to come back to, if we could, was something I noticed you say early on, that you basically enlisted when you were 17, and you said signing up as a child. 17?
So yeah, it is an interesting fact, but it is absolutely I mean, technically true that America is one of the nations in the world that does accept child soldiers. Technically,
Wow.
it's just, um, and again, like what I was saying before, you can enlist at 17 with guardian's signature, and for example, you can go do basic training and then come back and finish high school, you know, after that summer, and then you graduate and you're in the army, and that sort of thing. And I did, much to my parents' chagrin. I think, as I mentioned this the episode before, they were at the same time extremely supportive of me and proud of me wanting to pursue my dreams. The other time, very, very much not excited about the prospect of me uh, going into the airborne infantry in 2004. And so, yeah, that, and you bringing that up, I have to say, the Kyle Rittenhouse trial is been on my mind, quite a bit, and I reflect on my journey, myself at 35 now, and where I was at 17, you know, wanting nothing more than to join the military and fight for what I thought was right. And, it's not, I mean, I had the support of a nation behind me at that time, and as a 17-year-old in 2004, little, there was so little room for questioning the war at that time. I think we can all remember that. And
Hmm.
and there was so many external factors of mine propelling me, to this great adventure. And yeah, I mean, I'm not, I'm trying to get very, trying to stay very apolitical with this, but the fact that Kyle was a child when the events occurred, technically a child who was supported by people who equipped him with the firearm, who drove him to the location, as opposed to, this was not a lone wolf incident. This was not a vigilante patriot, whatever, you morally you put on it. This was someone who was fervently supported by their community to be put in the situation they were put. And you could probably, maybe you could say the same thing for the victims of that night too. But um, I haven't watched much of the trial. I just don't, I just know that I don't know who I would be if I was 17 years old right now and had the mind, that I had in 2004. So whatever that's worth, I think it's deserving of empathy and pity for people that are maybe forced into situations, thinking that they are absolutely doing the righteous good thing. I don't know.
No, but this is a powerful moment in the United States, because I think that there are many parallels to that, about people believing in something that they believe in, and that they need to do the right thing for it. And
Yeah.
you know, that's part of the I am, is saying, okay, so that's your I am. That's the best you can do, but let's try to understand it based on the influence of the four domains. Doesn't mean it's a free ride, you're held responsible,
Right.
but understanding it is different than judging it. Uh, And so there you are, a 17-year-old, impressionable.
Yeah.
The United States is, you know, I think more or less on the same page, the majority of people perhaps on the same page, unlike now where we have real political divides, which, have their own merits, and there's history behind it. But there you are now, these years later, it sounds like you're reflecting back and wondering what.
Yeah. Um, I do try. Yeah, I guess mine is a pretty extreme, unique example. The 180 that I've done. But I
But
mean, I
what,
think.
but what is that 180, Patrick? Because
Uh well, okay, yeah, the 180 from being a gung ho, rough and tough soldier who wants to go into the army and then get out and be a cop, and work for the DEA, um, to a now social anarchist, who is also an abolitionist and believes that the entire justice system needs to be completely restructured and relooked at. Um, but I mean, who among us didn't have some crazy shit that they did? Some, excuse me, some crazy stuff that they did when they were 17, 18, 19, that we now look back
right,
on.
right, and certainly, I hope you're not judging yourself, but recognizing, what is a 17-year-old brand. I mean, we talk about this in drug story theater. The impulsive limbic brain that is in charge, as opposed to the more rational prefrontal cortex brain that is now thinking things through. What will happen next if I do this now? And also in the last show, you talked about, yes, we need to change, but it doesn't mean that we can do it without being held accountable for what we have
Right.
done.
Right.
I thought that was a very, very important point that you made in the last show as well.
Well, yeah, I appreciate. Thank you for bringing that up. And that's sort of, I mean, I struggle with that. How do I reflect my identity as a veteran? Um, and I believe, as far as accountability goes, I believe in taking ownership, of positions I was in, decisions that I made, etc. But I believe approaching that from a source of empathy, and with me and everyone else, on both sides of the table, my enemies as well.
Yeah. Well, even if we have enemies, I still believe that all human beings want the same thing, which is just to feel valued by somebody else. And this, of course, is at an individual level and at a national level. And that's part of the struggle that we have. How do we remind someone else of their value, um, even if we don't agree with their position, you know?
Why? Right. Or, I mean, that kind of had me thinking back on the subject of a veteran suicide
Mm,
and people not feeling their value, maybe. Um, and this is a pretty common thing you'll hear of other veterans. In my team, my company, we've lost more to suicide than we have to those killed in action.
yeah.
And I was thinking about that because we kind of talked about this last night in prep for this show. And this feeling that you get on deployment, right? That all you're doing is just sitting over there and just thinking about the life that you'll have once you get out. I mean, it's almost like prison in that way, and your mind runs wild, and the person you've been talking to back home, you're gonna move in with them, and everyone's gonna be like, oh, it's them, the veteran. Yeah, we love you and we'll support you forever. Um, and then I think with a lot of guys, something that's not talked about is the reality of the mundane life that happens after the most exciting period in your life. You go and fight this war and you experience objectively awesome and remarkable things. And I don't mean as in like cool, but like truly awe-inspiring. You can't fathom what you've witnessed. And I don't think combat becomes addictive, but I think surviving combat becomes addictive.
Yeah.
And I think that you see a real difference in people that have just been mentally torn up over the horrors of war, and just as toxic, you have people that have become war junkies. And I would say that the guys that I know that took their life after the service fit more into this war junkie category. Um, I don't know that we know how to even process that as a society. How do we deal with that? Um,
It's interesting. I don't know whether I've heard the war junkie part as much as people thinking post-traumatic stress, survivor's guilt, um, the
yeah,
overwhelming anxiety of always being, on edge and anything can happen. And I know that we're going to come back to this, but anything could happen if we don't take a break for our sponsors. And I certainly wouldn't want that to happen because we do have some survival skills going on here. But this is a really important topic, folks. We're going to come back to this because this is powerful. But first, we'll give our sponsors a chance to let us know about their power. Larry, let's take a commercial break. We'll be back with the Dr. Joe Show.
And we are back with the Dr. Joe Show with Patrick Troy-Brandt, talking about his experiences and his experiences alone as a soldier, veteran, and an actor. And we got pretty deep there off the air, and I think we're going to keep going with it.
Yeah. We were talking about the suicides in our veterans, 30,000, and unfortunately counting. And Patrick, I'm just wondering what your thoughts are, where you want to go with this.
you know, I think again, I guess. Well, I think, and I'm not an expert. I haven't looked up numbers on this, but maybe it's worth mentioning that I feel like suicides might be up across quite a few members of the categories of people nowadays. But yeah, obviously, I mean, with service members and with veterans. I mean, I think back to what we were just talking about before, that maybe there's still a disconnect in actually listening to what's bothering veterans and what's bothering people, and maybe there's still an apprehension for veterans to fully talk about all of their experiences, because I think that a lot of people don't understand that it's not what you think that makes you unhealthy. It's what you do with those thoughts, right?
Yes, absolutely. There's nothing wrong with the feeling. It's what you do with it that's important.
And I think that there's, at least I know, again, in the infantry community, there's a serious apprehension to kind of talk freely about some of the more positive associations people have with their wartime experiences. And I'm not saying that's necessarily healthy, to have a positive attachment to a particularly gruesome firefight, but that's definitely something that needs to be talked about openly.
Yeah, and again, you're right. I mean, through COVID, all categories have increased in terms of depression, anxiety, and in completed suicides. But I think, there's the mythology that soldiers are tough and they're meant to be able to withstand all this stuff. And if you as a soldier can't do that, then there's something wrong with you. Or the idea that we're on such high alert all the time when you're in combat or facing that. I mean, and then you come back home and you can't turn that part of your brain off. Yeah. And it's overwhelming, the anxiety and that fear. And yet you're not meant to be afraid. You're a soldier. So there may be all of that. And I want to just segue it back, if it's okay, back into the theater, because you were in a show during COVID called All My Sons. And it's, I know we were talking a bit about that off air as well, but can you just like talk a little bit about that show, what it is,
Sure.
and you as a veteran uh, being in it?
Yeah. So, for those who don't know, All My Sons is a classic Arthur Miller play that takes place in the late 1940s, and it centers around a Midwestern family that has two adult sons that went off to fight in World War II, and one of them didn't come home. Um, and spoiler alerts all over the place in here, but it was written in 1948, so you probably should have checked it out by now. But no, but anyway, as it turns out, the father was in charge of a factory that manufactured airplane engines, and there was a crack in there was a fault in the manufacturing process, and we are led to believe that the father let these engine heads go through the factory to make the quota, and this engine ended up being in, the airplane of a plane that killed a bunch of American pilots, and the son is so overwrought with grief that he ends up committing suicide by diving his plane into the ocean, essentially. Um, so I played the surviving son, Chris, who was a World War II veteran, and Chris was dealing with, amongst other things, a significant amount of unchecked survivor's guilt, and um, and uh, that's definitely something that I've struggled with. With a There was a particular mission that, um, without going into the details, essentially the truck that I was crewing, the gun, there, gun truck, a Humvee with a machine gun on it, was switched out for another team's truck last minute for some freak incident, and that team's truck ended up hitting an incendiary IED, in which the occupants inside burned. Um, and so, it's taken a lot to talk about that freely, but
I appreciate you being able to do that. So you were going to be that truck
yeah,
that switched
I
out.
mean, yeah, we were, I was a scout truck for convoy operations, which means that this was in Iraq. And so the scout truck drives 3 to 5 kilometers above in front of the convoy to, scout for things. And just at the last minute, one of our truck's engines was having trouble. So the convoy behind us was sent out the gate first. And
Whoa.
that's what we understand happened.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, I mean, um, navigating a character that's so, close to yourself, especially when it comes to the trauma that they have endured and that they're going through, is a slugfest. It was really, and it was compounded by the fact that we were, my class was going through this, in 2020. So we were supposed to be doing this live in theater, with other breathing, living people around us, but we were allocated to the world of Zoom. So each actor was in their own apartment. I mean, I'm in the apartment I'm in now, um, trying to be in a realism scene with other Zoom faces. Um, and the most the weirdest thing was at the end of the night, once you switched off from rehearsal or from a show, I was just here alone, and
Hmm.
and yeah, I had a couple of pretty significant breakdowns over
Hmm.
that. um, but I will also say that, um, because of the support that I've had, I've kind of been able to work through that, and it's been an intense sort of therapy for me. Um, it's been said that that acting shouldn't be your therapy, but it can be therapeutic. You shouldn't become an actor because you want to solve your problems, but
Hmm.
sometimes it works out. But yeah, I mean, I think about maybe someone who is very close to the AIDS crisis that has, that has to perform in Angels in America, which is a play that centers around exactly around that. And so it's, my story's not unique, but it is a facet of the actor life, I guess.
So that's a small change with a big effect. The fact that you were there, the show is over and you're alone, as opposed to being in backstage with the whole crew of people.
Right.
The I am small changes can have big effects. What small change can you recommend to people who may be going through similar things right now, Patrick?
Yeah, I guess this time I would offer that having a creative outlet can really offer you something. Just don't keep it bottled up. And, if there's no one to talk to immediately, find a way to express it a different way, and that you can share with other people at a later date, maybe.
Mm.
But I think creativity, and I think give yourself a creative outlet, you know.
And the second truth of the I am, you control no one, you influence everyone. You get to choose the kind of influence you want to be. Patrick, you've been a pretty powerful influence tonight, but what kind of influence do you want to be?
Type of influence that supports the future generation, maybe.
Your sharing your experiences is so powerful. And I hope people can hear this, that it's okay to do this. It's okay to be who you are and not have to worry that you're broken or that you're less than, but that you're responding to the four domains. Your home domain, the social domain, the biological domain, and the I see. How do I see myself? How do I think other people see me? And Patrick, you're telling us that the way you saw yourself when you were 17 is different than now. And this just makes sense, folks. We will look at ourselves differently, but never underestimate yourselves. You have enormous, enormous value. Enormous value. Patrick, thank you so much for being here tonight.
Thank you.
Folks, thank you, veterans. Thank you, all of you, on the Dr. Joe Show.